I was sick with terror. Now I had not only the anger of my cousin Charles to contend with, but the wrath of the ghostly fingers as well. Rushing to my room, I slammed the door behind me, knowing full well that no door, no lock, could keep out Jade Green. I had acted in haste with little thought as to the consequences, and now my life here in Whispers would be the worse for it. What was I to do? There would be no sleep for me that night, nor would I dare blow out my candle. I went downstairs when I heard Uncle Geoffrey come back with Mrs. Hastings, and told them I would retire early. Mrs. Hastings, however, was staring at the piano leg. "What is this?" she asked, bending down to run her hand over the mark I made. I threw the doorstop," I said. "I am terribly sorry. The door was open, and a rat ran in and crossed the parlor. I'm afraid I lost my head and thought to kill it, but only did the piano harm." It was impossible to know whether she believed me or not. The story itself was so feeble. Indeed, my face burned to tell the lie. "Well, you best go to bed. Perhaps I can cover the mark with polish," she said unhappily. I did as she suggested, but did not close my eyes. I propped myself up against my pillow and scanned the room. Every creak of a floorboard, every sigh of the wind, every click or scratch or clink, a branch scraping against my window even, produced in me such a panic that I felt if I were not already mad, I should be soon. When morning came, I could scarcely move from my bed. I wanted no questions, however, so I put on my brightest dress, my cheeriest smile, and arrived at the breakfast table as amiable as I could be, concentrating on my tea and biscuit and ignoring Charles, who always seemed to know when I was upset. "So, orphan, is that a false smile I see pasted on your lips this morning, or a real one?" he asked. "One should accept that a smile is a smile, and not try to make it other than it is," I told him, continuing the charade even then. "But are those dark circles I see under your eyes?" he asked. "You did not sleep well, I take it." Had he anything to do with the hand? I wondered. Were they united for my own destruction? "I am quite well, I assure you," said I, not answering his question directly. And then, to Mrs. Hastings, I added, "I think I shall take my tea in the garden, if you don't mind." "Of course," she said, "for the air feels as though it will bring rain tomorrow. Enjoy it while you can." I carried my tea to the table outdoors, but was dismayed when my cousin followed and sat down across from me, so that it was most difficult to tip my cup without looking into his eyes. "So, what has Waggle-tongue Violet to say about me these days, I wonder? Helene, too," he began. "Why not ask them?" I said. "Because their stories are written all over your face, and I amuse myself reading between the lines." He smiled the sort of smile I did not care for. "I dare say you already know what's being said about you," I countered. "You need only to look to your own conduct, Charles, for your answer." "My own conduct?" He laughed heartily. "That I am a man who enjoys his ale, who appreciates women, who was challenged by a good bet or a fast horse? Is not such a person a man in every sense, and would you like me less of one?" "A man, sir, in my opinion, is moderate in his drink, selective of his women, and does not risk his money over a gaming table." "Ah, then you would best stick to your poor Zeke Carey, with his simple pleasures. You'll grow up marrying a simple man, and become a dull wife with simple children." "My affairs are no concern of yours," I said curtly. "Or mine yours, then," he said more jovially. "So let us have no more judgmental scowls from you, Judith. What I do on my own is strictly my business. Don't you agree?" There was truth in what he spoke, and I thought perhaps if I should change my manner towards him, he in turn might behave differently with me. And so, with a deep breath, I extended my hand across the table and said, "Yes, cousin, I agree. From now on, I shall withhold my scowls, if indeed there is any on my face, and shall not meddle in your concerns, if you will not meddle in mine." "Agreed," he said. as long as you allow me to inquire of your health now and then, and to offer my assistance should you need me in any way." "That would be most charitable of you," I told him, but as I tried to withdraw my hand, he would not allow it, and holding fast to my wrist, ran one finger lightly across my palm, up my arm, leering at me as he attempted to gain entrance into the sleeve of my dress. I jerked myself away from him with such force that I upset my teacup. Charles only laughed as I ran back into the house. All day the episode weighed on my mind, but Violet was chattering on about a new beau of hers, how they had sneaked off to the shore in the moonlight and gone for a nighttime swim. My eyes opened wide as I listened to this, but I laughed along with her at her impulsiveness. "But how were your clothes to be dried if there was no sun?" I asked. "How do you explain to your mother when you returned that your dress is drenched in salt water?" This time, Violet's eyes fairly danced, and she leaned over so that her lips touched my ear. "We didn't wear clothes," she told me. "We swam buck naked." I gasped, my face reddening at the shocking news, but I could not help laughing as well. "Violet!" said I, glancing around lest we be overheard. "Surely not!" She nodded and went on with her stitching, smiling. But how can you avoid touching each other when you're in the water together with the waves rolling in?" Again, she leaned my way. "We didn't avoid that at all," she said. I immediately bent over my work, my face red with this new knowledge, trying to imagine Zeke and me on equally familiar terms. I imagined it all too well and felt feverish the rest of the day. To be young was a most wonderfully scary thing, I decided, for no one could know what lay ahead, and there was much to experience. The very same thought brought with it the memory of Jade Green's picture, and the way it had appeared for a moment in my mother's frame, so full of life and adventure. She had been rescued from the gutter and placed in my uncle's house, given, I would guess, every opportunity to make something of herself. How could she cut short so young a life? I wondered again as I had so many times before. "Violet," I found a chance to whisper that afternoon. "How did they know Jade took her own life? How did they know she wasn't murdered? 'Twas plain as day, and obvious to all that she had planned it. For it was winter time when it happened, and Jade had put on a heavy sweater and hidden herself in the attic. She was found dead on the stairs from loss of blood, her severed hand beside her, and in her other hand, the cleaver." I closed my eyes and swallowed, remembering the chop, chop, chop of the cleaver in the kitchen, and later, the sight of the partially severed finger trailing after the others. All afternoon, I thought of Jade Green's death, and it was still on my mind when I rode home in the wagon with Zeke. When I mentioned it to him, however, he said, "It's a strange way to die, I'll grant you. But do you have to dwell so much on this, Judith? Can't you add a little fun into your life?" He was right, of course. "What would you have me do?" I asked defensively, and then, on impulse, I added, "Swim in the sea buck naked?" My cheeks suddenly turned bright red, that I should say such words to him aloud. He turned to me in such surprise that I laughed to see his face. Zeke chuckled all the way home, and was smiling yet again when I jumped off the wagon and ran inside. At dinner that evening, Uncle Geoffrey seemed of an unusually serious manner, and just before Mrs. Hastings brought out the cake and berries, he said, "Charles, if you have no urgent business after dinner, I would like you to stay for a time, as I have something to discuss while we are all at the table." "Does it concern me alone, Father, or is an audience required?" Charles asked. "It concerns all in the room," said Uncle Geoffrey. "So, if you would be so good, sir, as to stay for a short while." I wished he had announced this after the cake had been served, for I was so worried as to what he might say that I scarce enjoyed my dessert. When the cake had been eaten and the tea brought for the ladies and brandy for the men, Uncle Geoffrey leaned back in his chair, one hand in his vest pocket, and said, "I am leaving town for 2 days and will be in Charleston on business. It's time I went over my financial holdings, updated my will, and see to other matters." What I would like to state, however, in the presence of all three of you, is that I am directing my attorney, in the event of my death, to divide my property thus. The house shall go to you, Mrs. Hastings, who has cared for it so faithfully all these years, with the condition that Judith will be allowed to remain here and call it home for as long as she likes. Charles gasped, but his father continued. All the rest of my holdings, my land, my accounts, my stocks and bonds, shall be divided 3 ways. 1/10 to you, Mrs. Hastings, the other 90% to be divided equally between Judith and Charles. A chair scraped as Charles rose to his feet, his face contorted with rage. The sight of him frightened me greatly. Mrs. Hastings, in fact, was as pale as flour. "This is an outrage, father, and an insult to your rightful heir," he said, and turning so suddenly that his chair tipped over backward and crashed into the floor, he strode out of the room and left the house.